Welcome one and all, I'm Josh Rivers, and I can't believe these words are leaving my mouth in this order, but this video is going to be a bit more serious. Telltale games are disappearing from storefronts, and nobody knows why. A lot of the focus has been on Tales from the Borderlands having been pulled from Steam, what with Borderlands 3 being on the horizon and Borderlands as a property being on people's minds. But more drastically, Good Old Games delisted every Telltale game in their library after having received an official agreement termination and title takedown notice for all Telltale titles, as reported by Kotaku. They were apparently told to delist all of their Telltale properties by May 27th, which they did. And again, nobody really knows why. Curiously enough, and again from the same Kotaku article, a spokesperson from 2K Games, the Borderlands license holders, said that they were working to get Tales from the Borderlands back on digital storefronts, but when reached out to for comment by Kotaku, didn't actually explain why it had been taken off of storefronts in the first place. Telltale Games vanishing from storefronts is not new. There are many reports of games being taken down in November of last year as Telltale entered liquidation. This run of disappearances included titles such as Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, even The Walking Dead. They were all delisted from Steam in November of last year. But curiously, not other platforms? Some of the games that had been removed from Steam were reportedly still available on console storefronts, although with the recent run of takedowns that may have changed. Articles from the time, including this one from Polygon, do make mention of the fact that Telltale was in the process of selling off the last of its assets when these takedowns occurred. But while one would assume that Telltale's closure is part of the explanation, it's not explicitly named as being the reason for the takedowns. Indeed, a reason isn't explicitly named, full stop. So it's not just that we don't know why this is happening now, we've not known why this has been happening for about 6 months. Now, whenever anything major happens in any industry, it's usually because money. So my best guess would be that there is some dispute over who gets the money from sales of these games now that Telltale itself has closed down. And therefore, so as not to compound the problem, it was decided that for the time being they would just stop selling these games. On some platforms, and not others. For some reason. It's not a perfect theory, and the real explanation is probably a lot more convoluted. There are, after all, a lot of parties involved, a lot of chefs around the broth, a lot of corporate fingers in that good old pie. But as I say, it's only guesswork. And guessing is the only thing we can really do right now, because nobody will furnish us with a bloody explanation. The larger games industry is infamous for its lack of transparency. Part of what makes actual games journalism so difficult to do is the fact that whenever anything noteworthy does happen, most companies in the AAA space just close rank and wait for people to shut up about it. And this is what they appear to be doing with the disappearance of a company's entire output. One of the biggest priorities for companies in any industry is image. There's a reason marketing budgets get so bloated. Companies trade on confidence. They want to give off the image that everything's in hand. We've got this. Everything's going according to plan. So it stands to reason that if a company is engaged in any disputes or experiencing any technical difficulties, they would want to keep it relatively quiet, because it would interfere with their messaging. But silence doesn't make you look better. It doesn't inspire confidence. If anything, it makes you look untrustworthy. It makes you look callous, it makes you look like you're not taking it seriously, and it only serves to rile and agitate your audience, your customer base. You know, the people you're trying to convince to give you money. If people are left without an explanation for something, many will fill in the blanks with the worst version of events they can imagine. And maybe there will be write-ups that give you the benefit of the doubt, but it won't matter, because it's the negative press that's going to get all the attention. Surely you know how the internet works by now. All of which is to say, this entire situation is baffling. But we're not going to get an answer. We never get an answer. And where does that leave us? A vast number of games have just been whittled out of existence, and after 6 months, we don't know why. We don't know why it's only certain platforms and not others, and we don't know whether or not it's permanent. And if you think that's frustrating, imagine being one of the people who actually made these games. Oh, that's right, they don't know why this is happening either. Going back to the Kotaku article, they reached out to 5 former employees of Telltale, none of whom knew why this was happening or why it was only to certain games. And understandably, it's kind of heartbreaking for them. One of the former employees here is quoted as saying, "Seeing games they crunched over and poured their hearts into suddenly disappear from the universe is a huge gut punch." And yeah, I would think. To be in this crunch-happy industry, some studios bragging about 100-hour work weeks, to be forced into unreasonable overtime kept from your families, kept from your lives, everything else in your life put on hold by these companies to get these games out the door, and then they're just snapped out of existence like that, with no word of explanation to anyone? That's fucking terrifying. Because it's not as though this is an isolated incident. Remember PT? Or that Scott Pilgrim game that always gets brought up in archival conversations? It's also fairly routine to see licensed games get purged from digital storefronts once the licensing agreement's expired. Activision has been hit hard by this over the years. They had to pull a number of Marvel titles like Deadpool and various Spider-Man games, What They'd Done. They had to pull a number of James Bond games like GoldenEye and Quantum of Solace. And they've had to pull a bunch of Transformers games, including Transformers Devastation, which at the time was only about 2 years old. You were wondering why I was using footage from that game, weren't you? Well, now you know. Usually, at least, people who have already bought these digital games will still be able to access them. Those purchases will still be honoured, as the statement always goes. But there's a reason that companies keep clarifying that point whenever this happens. And it's because technically they don't actually have to honour those purchases, since when you're buying a game digitally, you're not actually buying the game, you're just buying a license to play the game for as long as the publisher wants to let you keep playing the game. So even though doing so would be a massive PR nightmare for any company that did it, they are perfectly legally entitled to take away your access to games that you have bought and paid for. Well then. These are the dangers of the digital future companies are pushing for, where you don't technically own anything, games can just vanish off of storefronts, and even the ones you've already bought aren't safe. At least not in any tangible sense of the word. And since indie developers have come to rely on digital distribution because it eliminates the costs of physical production that would otherwise make releasing games unviable for them, this fact should be of particular concern to anyone who's coming to look at videos made by a site called Indie Haven. This is one of the reasons I try and avoid buying games digitally if there's a physical version available. But even then, that physical copy will only do you any good as long as someone's still making and selling the hardware that can run it. And a lot of physical games you own could go the way of VHS sooner than you'd think, thanks to the industry's weird and often reluctant relationship with backwards compatibility. PS3 was only backwards compatible with the PS1, the PS5's going to be backwards compatible apparently, but only with the PS4. Xbox One's backwards compatible, but only with certain games, and even then there can be weird caveats. So even physical releases that can't just be taken down from a storefront aren't safe forever, because there's liable to come a point where just nobody makes hardware that can run them. So why do I bring all of this up? Why am I bundling it all into the same video? It's because it all boils down to the same basic point. For an industry that demands so much from its workers in order to create these games, they really don't seem all that bothered about preserving their output. Video games are not only one of the most expensive forms of entertainment on the market, they're also becoming one of the least permanent. And that is, to use a technical term, real fucky. But it has just sort of been accepted that that's the way of things. begrudgingly perhaps, but accepted nonetheless. It is just sort of accepted that unless they get re-released, we're gonna just lose access to certain games. And that's a thought that I find really, really sad. Aside from doing these videos for Indie Haven, I also have my own YouTube channel. And a big part of what I do on that channel is just playing old games that I used to enjoy a lot as a child. And that channel is never going to be successful, because I am a complete no-name throwing his hat into the ring years after the gold rush has already ended. I'll be lucky if 5 people on this planet even remember I made those videos, but I do it anyway because in reality, I'm only making them for myself. And the reason I do it is because I've come to realise that there's gonna come a point when I can't play these games anymore. Someday, these videos, they're gonna be the only way I can experience playing these games again. I mean, is it me or is that kinda fucked? And so now even when a new game comes out that I love, Nier Automata, God of War, Spider-Man, Devil May Cry 5, I think that might even be in chronological order, it's really difficult not to have that experience tainted by the thought of, there's gonna come a time when I can't play this anymore either. And again, the people doing 100-hour work weeks for this stuff. Imagine what that thought must do to them. The realisation of how quickly it can all just become dust, because the larger games industry simply doesn't care about its legacy. Not unless it can make money from it somehow. Corporations only care about how they can make money now, in this moment. And as uncomfortable as it can be to admit as someone who champions video games as an art form, they have been a heavily corporate affair for almost as long as they've been in the popular consciousness. And that's why the infrastructure, the business of video games, has been built so short-sightedly, with no real regard for its future or preservation of its output. And so fans, archivists, and even the developers of the games themselves can be, and frequently have been, left in the lurch like this, as the art they've invested themselves in, sometimes to the point of breaking themselves in order to make it, just vanishes into the ether because of a license agreement, because of a spat with an employee, and now apparently we don't even have to be given an explanation. Anyway, I just thought that was worth mentioning.